Welcome to Dev Bootcamp Life, the podcast where we help you level up so you can become the best software engineer on your team, or we help you land your first engineering job. This is Juan Lizarazo.
This is Jared Potter.
And today, Jared has brought us an exciting topic that I'm sure is going to help you out with your next application. So Jared, tell us about it. What's the topic for today?
Yeah, so the topic today stems from this place where a lot of my students who are looking to land their first job in the software industry struggle with, which is building up and leveling up your skills to a point where you can get your first job. And there's lots of different ways to learn out there, from tutorials and articles and things like that. But one of the best ways I think of learning is building real projects, because real projects is what you're going to be building in the real world. Not working on little isolated pieces, but how do you build a bunch of little isolated pieces and bring them together? So the topic today is how to plan, design, build better web applications.
Okay, that's a good one, and that's very relevant. Yeah, that's good. That's pretty good. Yeah, okay, awesome. So let's just start. So since you brought the topic, Jared, you got to start.
Totally. So a lot of students struggle to get started with building a project. Like, what do I build? What I would say that step number one to this whole process is either imagining a new idea, something that you've always wanted to build perhaps, or even if it's not a new idea, let's say it's already an existing idea, that's okay. The idea is you're using this to practice and to level up your skills. So number one is to come up with an idea and write it down in 1 or 2 sentences. Try to make it really concise what you want to build. The second step to this would be to define the scope of the MVP. You might hear that term out there, and it stands for minimum viable product. And really what it means is it's the most minimal software that you can build that does the thing that you want it to do, but with nothing else, nothing extra, because all that extra stuff is going to prevent you from launching. So what I would recommend, and this is how I do it, is I actually just write down a bulleted list of what the application needs to do. And then I keep a separate list called version 2. So any kind of really fun ideas like, oh, I want to build this, add this, and this, and this, and this, I just put those on my version 2 list so I can keep track of them. And like my brain is like, okay, they're acknowledged, but they're not going to be part of version 1. Yeah, so this is kind of like an initial step to get started. What's your thought on those ideas, Juan?
Yeah. So, when you want to build a project, right, ideally you want to pick a topic that is something from the real world, a real problem. Like, for example, let's say, hey, I want to build, a calculator. That would be fun, right? But I would say, like, pick something real. Let's say, for example, you want to, let's say you want to keep track of your recipes when you're cooking, maybe create a recipe app. And yeah, there's hundreds out there, but the fact that you build that is going to help you level up. Well, something that I like doing that I have found a lot of experience with, like I have learned a lot from, is that I like to replicate existing features that are out there. For example, sometimes I look, for example, at facebook.com and I see the comment section or the new post section. And I see that they have these transitions and they do these different things with it. So I try to replicate that. I'm like, hey, how did I build that? Let's try to build something like it. And then I try to build it. And then I learned throughout the process because I discover things I didn't know, right? It's kind of like looking at their, thinking how they solve their problem. Another thing I like doing is that I like to look at open source, right? And sometimes I like to look into how libraries work, and then I try to replicate it. For example, have you heard about Preact, right? That there is like an alternative to React. It's a lightweight alternative to React. So what happens is that the engineer behind it, who created it, he just wanted to create like something like he didn't look at the code base of React. He just said like, I'm going to build something like React, but I'm not going to look at the code base. I just want to keep the APIs the way they are, the public APIs. And he went and built that, right? So the thing is, like, to come up with ideas is not really hard, because if you don't have an idea, just go and look at something that is already built and try to build something similar. But it's very important what Jared said, scope it, because if not, you're going to be building forever, right? You want to like keep it, to the scope. And that's what I like. That's what we talk we refer to as requirements. So this is a keyword for you to learn, and go read everything you can about it. Requirements, right? What the software is supposed to do. There's functional and non-functional requirements, right? So you want to focus on the functional requirements for your MVP. Remember that keyword also, MVP, minimum viable product, right? So there's a lot of literature out there. I recommend you go and read everything you can about those two things. But those are those are great for a good start.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, I really like what you said there about finding some existing piece of functionality and then trying to recreate it. I think that's a powerful way to learn new things. And a lot of things on the web are just rehashes of the same thing at the end of the day. So it's like, if you can build something in one version, you know, you might build something very similar to that in your eventual job or future jobs. So I really like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Going on to the kind of the next step of the process that I've imagined is, so once you have your idea, you know, defined, and you have your MVP list, you know, very concise on what you really want to do, the next step is, in my opinion, is to kind of sketch it up as a wireframe. So I'm a little bit old fashioned. I'll even use like some pencil and paper at times, or using like a digital tablet for some people if you have it available. Or another option is there's lots of online tools out there. One of them is called Figma. I use it for my own personal projects just to wireframe up things. When you sketch it up from your list of requirements, then it allows you to begin to realize what it's going to look like. What are the transitions between one app state to the next app state? And it gives it that tangible aspect. What's your favorite way to sketch things up,
Yeah,
Juan, and perhaps
I
do a
like
little bit of
sketching.
design?
Yeah, I like sketching on my notebook, so I always have it handy. I always have it with me, right? And I always have, you will see all these little things there, because when I'm thinking through the problem, I always sketch what I want to do. I'm not a graphic designer, but that gives me an idea of what I want to create for the user interface, and then I can have a graphic designer just like refine it, or decide how it should actually look like. But I have the foundational pieces. Something I do with that is like those diagrams help me define what components I need to create, and also what modules. The fact of let's say you say your app has 5 screens and you draw 5 screens, you most likely will think like, okay, these 5 screens are grouped in 3 different modules. So now I have to create 3 modules, right? So you start thinking, I mean, just at a general level, not going specific into the technology, right? But you define, it helps you define those requirements. So another keyword that I'm going to throw at you is user story. So usually I grab those drawings, and from there I start creating my user story map, or I start writing down my user stories. So go and research about user stories. They're a good a good technique to split the project on what it needs to do from the user's perspective, and that's the next logical step for me.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with that. That's a great point there. With when you sketch it out, it immediately then helps you quantify, which components, which pages you need, how you're kind of group things together. And that's a great roadmap, a good path to follow. When you actually go to start building it, you're like, oh, okay, that makes sense. I'm going to start building this particular piece, right? Makes it very clear in that.
Yeah. One piece of advice I always give my students is that never go, like, let's say you have to solve a problem, never go and start writing code. No. Always stop, think through the problem, write things down, start diagramming, and after like a moment of work, like it could be hours or minutes, right? Depending how big the problem or how complex, then you start writing code. But if you go and write code, like start writing code right away and solving as you're writing code, that's not the right approach. And most likely you are not going to come up with a high quality solution.
Oh yeah, every time I start coding prematurely, even in my day-to-day job, and if I don't just kind of sketch out what I'm trying to do, I'll eventually get myself stuck in all the specific logic of an if statement or something, and kind of just get a little bit confused at times. And sometimes I just need to take a step back, sketch it out, and then it makes sense. And then when I do it, I'm like, oh, that makes perfect sense. So yeah, I completely agree with that. Another thing here that I would recommend students do when you are drawing out this project, whatever you're building, I would say assume in the beginning that you're the only user. Don't what the reason I say this is because as soon as you add in this idea of having multiple users on your web page, you are talking about user authentication, the ability to register, to create an account, to log in, forgot password, right? There's all these different aspects, and those are important aspects to understand. But at first, I would just not worry about that complication of that aspect and just focus on building it as if you're the only user. When you go to the web page, it's as if you are already logged in. What's your thoughts on that one?
Yeah, so that one, I'm going to throw another two keywords at you, whoever is listening out there. This refers a lot to, in the industry, we call these actors or personas. Usually from the user designer perspective, the UX perspective, the user experience perspective, it's called a persona, right? A persona is kind of like, think of the entity that will interact with your system. So in this case, it could be an admin, right? Or it could be a logged in user, or it could be already a not authenticated user, like a public user, right? So even though like a public user could transition into an authenticated user, they're treated like maybe separate roles, separate personas, right? Because they're going to see different things, right? They have to go through different process. One has to just log in, one has to sign up first before they can log in. So personas or actors, when you're actually designing, if you look into diagramming, when you're doing software architecture and you're doing diagrams, right? It's different types of diagrams, like class diagram, right? Or there's activity diagram. There's so many out there. So look into, I would say, like, read a little bit about UML, okay, and that will show you a little bit more about that. An actor is one of those pieces or units, and that's those entities that interact with your system. It can be a person or it could be another system, but those are important to establish early in the project so you know what you need to build and support. And because you're scoping for an MVP, then you just want to say, do what Jared said. You want to pick just the authenticated user, that's the only actor. I assume I'm already logged in. There's not even logged in. You build the whole thing, just assuming you're already logged in, and then you are authentication, for example. Like, it depends. It's just one way to board this, but it's always good to think about actors or personas.
Yeah, 100%. No, that's a great elaboration there of the different types of users that could be coming to your site. And what they're going to see, as your web app evolves. Totally get that. One really important thing that's kind of the next step here is don't worry about all the tiny details. Okay, there's going to be so many tiny details that you could consider in the beginning of building your web app that you should just ignore in the beginning. Okay, there's this term called analysis paralysis, where when there's too many choices, then you just get paralyzed and like being able to actually start. So, what are these tiny details? Well, a lot of them have to do with style, right? As Juan said earlier, he talked about functional requirements. Okay, functional means the function of, like, when you click on the button, what does the button actually do? Not what does the button look like? What does the button transition look like? None of that, right? So what I would say is, don't worry about styles. Don't worry about fonts. Don't worry about logos. Don't worry about what your domain name is going to be. That doesn't matter in the beginning. Don't worry about specific implementation coding details about specific components, right? In the beginning, try your best to not worry about all these different details, because it's just going to hold you back. Just always remember, you can always make it look better in the future, right? When I'm looking at candidates, resumes or their portfolio or things like that, I'm primarily looking at functionality. Does the application do what it needs to do? Style, I'm a little bit more forgiving of, because I struggle personally a little bit with writing my own CSS, right? But that's why UI UX designers have a job, is so they can help us, guide us with better design. But at the end of the day, we as engineers have to write that functionality, and it has to work. So, Juan, what are perhaps some other details of things that perhaps you see some of your students perhaps getting caught up in too early?
So, to add on what you just said, so one of the things is that when you're trying to solve the problem, always keep it agnostic to the technology you are using. So, for example, if you're still solving a problem and you early start thinking, well, I'm doing this with Node, and with Node I cannot do this and that, right? like you're gonna limit yourself and you're gonna divert from your word what you're trying to accomplish. So ideally, you first think, how are you gonna solve the problem? Oh, I need to build these modules. I don't know how I'm gonna build them. I need to have these screens. I don't know how I'm gonna build them, right? But then once you solve that, like once you have that in place, then you pick the technology, and then you are not limiting your decisions on what the problem, how you're gonna solve it based on the technology, because usually the technology is just the mean to solve the problem, and usually you can complement different technologies and you will solve the problem effectively. But if you're just limited to what you know at the time, let's say, oh, I just know that Node does not support this, but you don't know that there's like cloud solutions that do what you need to, then you're going to be like not solving the problem correctly because you're limiting yourself. The other thing that you mentioned is an anti-pattern, which is early optimization. So another thing that I want you to look at is like go and Google about anti-patterns. And one anti-pattern is early optimization. When you start optimizing early, let's say you think like, okay, I logged in, but what if I refresh? What if I send the link? What if I log in into computers at the same time? What if I log in and log out from a different tab? Like that's early optimization. First, solve the problem, get it to work, and then you start managing. And another keyword for you to learn, edge cases. Read everything you can about edge cases. So edge cases come later. Don't do early optimization, because if not, you're never going to release whatever you're building.
Yeah.
So yeah. Then to add like once I mean like things that I'm thinking that we can share that they so once they have the like, okay, they have the screens, right, they have everything ready, the program, I think the next step for me, I mean the next actual step is like pick the technology you want to use. What do you think of that, Jared? Like just tell me, like, is that the next natural step?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, depending on which technology you want to level up and grow your skills in, yeah, I mean, you want to pick the technology that's going to do the job.
Mm-hmm. And I want to make a note on that. So you went on the direction I wanted. So when you're building something for you because you want to level up, pick a technology that you don't really know very well or that you're not really great at. Let's say, for example, I have never really worked with Vue. So let's say if I do a side project, I might pick Vue and be like, okay, I'll pick Vue so I can learn Vue, right? But if you're building something for the real world, let's say something that is a paid project, right? Or you're at a company and you're going to build something for the company and they tell you like, hey, you can pick the technology. Don't pick something to learn it, because most likely you will make a lot of mistakes and it will be costly. Okay. So keep that differentiation there. If you're building something for you to learn, pick something you don't know, right? But when you're building something that is paid for the business, for your job, do it with what you know, because you already made the mistakes. Okay. So that's a piece of advice, because I've seen a lot of like people get excited and just want to be like, okay, let's use all this, right? And then they learn and build it, but then they made so many mistakes that it causes tech debt. So that's another keyword for you to learn. Go and Google everything you can about tech debt. I'm going to take a break here to share our Twitter. So remember, whatever platform you're listening this to on, or if you're watching this on YouTube, click the follow button or you subscribe. I mean, whatever you're using, right? So you can get notified when we publish new episodes. And if you want to get in touch with us, the easiest way is to reach out on Twitter. So I'm available at twitter.com/Juan Lizarazo G. And this is spelled JUAN LIZARAZOG. Tweet at me or message me and engage, and I'll reply. I mean, just let me know your thoughts, or if you need anything, I'll be happy to help you out. And Jared.
Yeah, you guys can find me at twitter.com/Jared Potter. That's JAREDPOTTER. And likewise, feel free to reach out to me about any of this project stuff that we've been talking about or any previous episodes. I'd love to have a professional conversation and help continue to level you up.
Awesome. Cool. So Jared, what would be the next item?
Yeah, so after kind of picking the technologies that you're looking to level up in, or also just begin, right, to learn, to go through that process. One thing just to note is, a lot of this software engineering industry comes about in our ability to learn. So it's important for us to continue to practice our skill of learning new things. So, you know, it's always staying hungry for the next thing. So yeah, so once you've picked your technology, so yeah, at this point you have, you know, what you want the app to be, you know, what you want, you've defined your web app idea, you have your list of MVP, you have your wireframes of what you want it to be. Again, no colors or fonts or anything like that's been decided. And again, you've done that in the mind of a persona of a single user. And again, we're ignoring all the little details. So the next step is going to be building the application, and also how to keep, basically stay sustained with your momentum of building this application. So there's a lot of you know, issues that students can run into, or you know, even people who are just learning students of life when they're building web applications. So one of the issues is people will not know perhaps where to get started or what to do. So what I would recommend, and this is one strategy that many websites recommend, is start building individual components. And some people recommend that you basically start with the lowest level component. So, you know, let's say you're creating a recipe app, and when you go to the home screen, it has a whole list of recipes. And each of the little recipes is like a little card with a picture and maybe a little description and a name. Well, start with that component, that one tile, that one little card that's showing off a recipe. You know, get that hooked up, get the properties being passed in whatever front-end framework you're learning. And then once you build that, perhaps then build the list component that's going to contain the whole, you know, a whole collection of those recipes that you'll then, you know, list out. So, you know, building in kind of that reverse order of you build the smallest components first and then kind of building out. Would be a recommendation I have. What's your take on?
Yeah, so I want to throw 2 or 3 items at you here. So, you know, this is very good because we can expose, this is about exposure, right? Maximizing anything we can share in the 30 minutes we have, right? So we have going deep so then they can do their homework and learn everything. So one of the things, mentioning like one of the things I would recommend you to read just to open your mind and learn different ways of approaching this is Atomic Design. So go and read about Atomic Design. I think it's like a blog or an article or a book, I don't remember, but you can find a lot about it. And one of the things it says is that you start with the smallest unit. They call it atoms, right? But there's really just components. So it's a component, it's a smaller unit that composes other units, right? And they have names for every unit, like different layers. So look into Atomic Design. That's a good way to think about this, especially for this component-driven architecture. Since you're using Angular, React, Vue, whatever library you're using, right, for building this UI, then it will help you think about it. It's not like kind of like, hey, that's how you have to do it, but it's a good way to think about how you're going to compose and build these building blocks. The other thing is that because we're talking about code, you gotta use version control, right? So version control, Git, right? Of course, you want to have some sort of manager system for that. I recommend you use a cloud-based system. So use something like GitHub or GitLab, right? GitHub.com, very popular. I would recommend you use that. Or GitLab or Bitbucket, right? They allow for private projects for free. So you can do it privately, or you can just do it public. I mean, you can do public projects if you are into open source, or you want to get feedback from friends and stuff like that. So it's very useful. Version control is very important when you're building anything. It's one of the fundamentals for high performing teams, right? You gotta have version control. Git, I mean, there's very different types of version control systems, but I recommend Git because it's what mostly everybody's using. There's also other options like TFS, right? Or there's also options like Perforce, and I mean, there's many more. There's I don't remember, like back in the day, there was this other option that was very popular. But Git is very popular now because, I mean, it's been for the past decade because it's distributed and it's not centralized. So it allows for offline work and stuff like that. So the third thing I wanted to share. Oh yeah, go ahead, Jared. What did you want to say?
Yeah, well, one of the things I was going to add there, I really like the version control, because one thing that my students struggle with is that sometimes when they're building, like when they were most recently building their final project, and happen to be in React, they would basically run into errors that would cause compilation to fail. But the thing is, they basically kept coding. They kept building more and more things, and the compilation was still failing because they never fixed the initial errors. So what they did is they kind of dug themselves into a hole of errors that then feels like you're never going to get out. So one thing that you can leverage with version control is like when you get to certain key points of your code working, take your files, stage them, commit them, push them up to GitHub or whatever repository you're using, so that in case you need to revert back to an older version that was working, you can do that. And this is a great way where you can practice your Git skills and get yourself out of trouble to be able to do this. So it kind of the other added point to that is don't let yourself get into that hole of things not working. In a minute here, after Juan's point, I'll add a little bit more into how to continue to make progress and keep your momentum, even when you don't know how to solve a particular problem. But keep going.
Yeah. One piece of advice regarding that is that that's what I call, I always tell people this and they laugh about it. It's like you're building on top of a lie. If you have an error, right, and you keep building, you're building on top of the error and things are working. The moment you fix that error, most likely you're building on top of a lie. And then when you fix that, right, the lie is discovered, exposed, and then other errors appear or side effects or defects on the software. And this is true for any type of software you build, also for CSS. Like imagine you have a bad rule, CSS, and then you start doing, let's say, margin minus 5 pixels, right? And you start doing that and everything looks nice. And then you find that you had something wrong in the CSS and you fix that. The rest of the CSS is going to be messed up because you built on top of a lie. So that's something very important. And one thing that I recommend is that always open your dev tools, your console tools, and always when you're building, you shouldn't have errors. At the moment you see a red error there, fix it. If you see an error and you keep just building, no, stop and fix it. Commit the change and commit often, okay? Commit multiple times a day. Every time you reach a meaningful change, let's say you got this button to render, do a commit. You got an error and you fixed it, do a commit, commit often. So the last thing I wanted to share about those 3 points was so we had atomic design, right? We have the version control, and the one is, that I really like is the smart and dumb component, right? It's just a pattern. So go and Google about it. This is still very popular and very, very relevant today when we split things into components that have logic or more logic, and they render other components that use process inputs and outputs. So keep that in mind, read about that, and this will give you a lot of tools and ways to think and approach the problem. Cool. So yeah, Jared, I think we have time to cover one more item. So and then let's do our recap.
Yeah, definitely. So kind of the last item I want to touch on is, and it has to do with the keeping momentum and keeping motivated and keeping pushing forward, because for a lot of students this can be hard. So what I would say is when you're working on a particular piece, maybe you're working and building on a particular component, and let's say you hit some issue that you're persisting on, you're trying to get solved, but you just can't solve it, you're looking at solutions online, what have you. If you're stuck for so long, right, like maybe it's 30 minutes or maybe it's an hour, right? Don't get me wrong. I mean, a big part of software engineering is the perseverance. But what's also really important with the perseverance is knowing when to say, hey, I'm going to stop on this piece. If that means commenting it out or whatever part's not working or causing an error, whatever, I'm going to stop working on that for a moment and maybe work on a different component for a little bit. So this way you're still able to make continuous progress forward. And then chances are sometimes when you come back and look at it again, it'll be a lot easier to solve. Or any software engineer who's been working for a little bit will have the experience where they'll have a problem, they can't solve it, they'll walk away. And then when they're walking away, they're like, oh, I got it. And then they'll have to run back to their computer to type it in. I know that you and I have both experienced that.
Yeah.
But yeah, being aware of, you don't have to force yourself through a concrete wall when you really are stuck. And at that point, that's also a useful time to reach out for help. If you have colleagues or friends or classmates, former classmates from your boot camp, reach out to them, maybe ask for some help. Juan and I have also offered help. No matter what kind of JavaScript front end thing you're working on, we'd be happy to to help perhaps solve some specific problem you're working on. But
Yeah, we won't be
under
able to solve your problem, but we definitely will give you input and point you on the right direction.
yeah, definitely. So yeah,
Awesome.
any other tips, Juan, on I guess keeping
Um,
momentum or how to
Yeah,
avoid getting stuck in
so of course
issues?
set realistic goals. One of the things, tell your friends about it. If you tell your friends, hey, I'm building this, they're gonna ask you and they're gonna follow up. So tell your other engineer friends like, hey, I'm building this. Let's talk, let's meet next week to so I can show you. And then that will motivate you, that will hold you accountable to build it. So if you don't tell anybody, chances are that you're probably never gonna finish and never gonna build it, right? So that's a good thing. And yeah, so I would say let's do our recap and let's call it a day, Jared.
Yeah.
So yeah, let's just list all the points we mentioned.
Yeah, so I'll go through my points here, and I'll let you go through your points as well. So to kind of quickly recap, the points I suggested there is number one, imagine some idea, write 1 or 2 sentences describing it. Two, defining the scope, the MVP. So I like to just list this out. Keep a version 2 of all your of all the daydreaming, nice things you'd like to have in the future. Three, sketch it out on paper, Figma, what have you. Wireframe it. No specific design, just wireframe. Assume that you're the only user at first. Don't worry about multi-users. And then don't worry about any of the details. Specific style, CSS, don't worry about it. And then when you're building, being able to keep momentum. And I think, well, I really liked what Juan said there. Don't build on top of a lie. If you have an error, fix it before moving on. Juan?
Yeah, so things that I shared, early optimization, anti-patterns, Google about anti-patterns, learn about that, right? Don't forget about actors and personas, right? This comes into software design. Check UML, right? UML, that will should tell you more about these. Also atomic design, version control, Git, right? And the part of smart and dumb components. And yeah, I think that's it. Oh, and requirements, important word, right? And the MVP that Jared, of course, shared, minimal viable product. Cool. Okay, so yeah, so this is it for today. Thank you for listening to Dev Bootcamp Life, and we'll see you next week. This was Juan Lizarazo.
This is Jared Potter.
Have a good day.